Moving into apartment 13 seemed like a stroke of luck at first, a cheap rental right next to my school. The apartment itself appeared weathered but habitable. The roof bore the marks of rust, hinting at years of neglect, while the wooden floors showed signs of age with every creak underfoot. The once white curtains, now tinged with age, added to the ambiance of antiquity that permeated the space. As I stepped inside, the door protested with a mournful creak, sending a shiver down my spine. Despite the eerie atmosphere, a sense of relief washed over me as my eyes landed on the bed, a haven of comfort amidst the unsettling aura of the apartment. Little did I know that initial sense of relief would soon give way to a chilling realization of the darkness that lurked within. The first hint of trouble surfaced on a night like any other, when exhaustion draped heavy over my shoulders, coaxing me into the embrace of sleep. As I approached the welcoming sanctuary of my bed, ready to surrender to the sweet release of slumber, I caught a glimpse of something out of place. There, at the side of my bed, stood the child with a cold, gray face. His presence was unexpected and unsettling, as if he had materialized from the shadows themselves. His eyes, vacant and lifeless, bore into mine, devoid of emotion or expression. For a fleeting moment, I dismissed him as a trick of the dimly lit room, a figment of my weary mind conjured from the dance of light and shadow. But as I blinked, hoping to dispel the illusion, he remained steadfast, a silent sentinel standing vigil in the corner of my bedroom. Fear prickled at the edges of my consciousness, an icy grip tightening around my heart. Who was this child, and what dark purpose had brought him to my bedside in the dead of night? I dared not speak, lest the sound of my voice shatter the fragile illusion of normalcy that hung precariously in the air. With a trembling hand, I reached out to touch him, to confirm his reality or banish him back into the depths of my imagination. But before I could make contact, he vanished into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of unease. Though I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the mind, a fleeting hallucination born from the depths of exhaustion, the memory of the child with the cold, gray face lingered like a ghost in the corridors of my mind, a silent reminder of the darkness that lurked within the walls. From that night on, he haunted my dreams, his presence a chilling specter that refused to be ignored. And when I woke, I could still feel his gaze upon me, his icy touch lingering in the air. I tried to shake off the eerie encounter with the child, convincing myself it was just a figment of my imagination, a mere trick of the mind brought on by tiredness and stress. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered like a shadow in the back of my mind. Then, one fateful night, a simple trip to the kitchen shattered any semblance of disbelief I clung to. Thirsty and disoriented from a restless sleep, I stumbled into the dimly lit kitchen, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. As I reached for a glass, my reflection in the window caught my eye. But it wasn't just my reflection staring back at me. It was the child with the big, pale eyes, his gaze piercing through the darkness like shards of ice. I froze, my hand trembling as I struggled to maintain my grip on the glass. And then, in an instant, he was gone, a fleeting apparition that left me questioning my sanity. But the sound of shattering glass beneath my feet shattered any doubts I had left. I had dropped the glass in my shock, the fragments scattered like stars across the floor. Heart pounding, I turned slowly, dreading what I might see behind me. And there he stood, the child with the angry face, his eyes burning with a fury that sent chills down my spine. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips as he reached out and grabbed my hand with a strength that belied his frail form. With a firm grip, he pulled me towards the window, his pale face contorted in a silent scream. Panic seized me as I realized his intentions. He wanted me to jump, to join him in whatever dark abyss awaited beyond the glass. Terrified, I tore myself free from his grasp and fled, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls as I raced back to the safety of my bedroom. But when I reached the threshold, he was there waiting for me, his anger palpable in the air. I slammed the door shut, heart pounding in my chest as I frantically searched for a way out. But there was no escape, No refuge from the nightmare that had become my reality. Trapped in a living nightmare, I knew I had to confront the darkness that haunted apartment 13. With trembling hands, I flung open the window, the cold night air rushing in to meet me. And there, on the other side of the glass, stood the child, a silent sentinel watching over me with eyes that burned with a terrible intensity. But this time, there was no fear in his gaze, only a profound sadness that spoke of a loneliness too deep to fathom. With a heavy heart, I reached out to him, my hand trembling as I bridged the divide between us. And in that moment, as our fingers touched, I felt a connection, a bond forged in the crucible of our shared suffering. As I jolted awake, disoriented and drenched in sweat, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I had just experienced was more than just a dream. The memory of the child's cold, pale hand wrapped around mine lingered like a specter in the dark corners of my mind. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, the soft glow of the screen illuminating the room. But as I glanced down at my hand, I froze, a chill running down my spine as I realized it wasn't just my hand I was seeing. There, intertwined with my own, was the unmistakable grip of a child's hand, a tiny, fragile thing that sent shivers down my spine. Panic surged through me as I tried to pull away, but the grip only tightened, a silent reminder of the horrors that had unfolded in apartment 13. Was it all just a nightmare, or had I truly encountered something beyond the realm of understanding? Determined to uncover the truth, I sought out my neighbors, hoping they could shed some light on the dark history of the apartment. And what I learned sent a chill down my spine. They spoke of the countless students who had occupied apartment 13, only to flee in terror after experiencing inexplicable phenomena. But it was the tale of the family who had once lived there that chilled me to the core, a story of neglect and abuse that ended in tragedy. The child, they said, had been a victim of his father's wrath, punished mercilessly for the crime of failing to meet his expectations. And one fateful night, unable to bear the pain any longer, he had fled to the window and leaped to his death, a desperate bid for escape from a life filled with suffering. My heart ached for the boy, his face haunting my thoughts with its mixture of sadness, fear, and anger. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. Gathering my courage, I made my way to the nearest cemetery, a single candle clutched tightly in my hand. With a silent prayer, I lit the candle and placed it before the small, weathered headstone that marked the boy's final resting place. As the flame flickered in the darkness, I made a promise to the child, to myself, and to all who had suffered within the walls of apartment 13. I vowed to leave that place behind, to never forget the chilling and terrifying experiences that had haunted me, and to honor the memory of the boy who had been robbed of his chance at happiness. With a heavy heart and a newfound sense of resolve, I turned away from the cemetery and never looked back. And though the memories of that fateful night would always linger, I knew that I had found closure, that I had finally laid to rest the ghostly echoes of the past. In the quiet hours of the night, as the world outside slumbered in darkness, our home became a sanctuary of mourning. My beloved grandfather, a pillar of strength and love, lay in his casket, his presence a bittersweet reminder of the profound loss we had suffered. I remember him vividly, with his weathered face adorned by a beard of gray and white, a testament to a life well lived. Despite the roughness of his exterior, his eyes sparkled with warmth, his lips curled into a gentle smile that could melt even the coldest of hearts. He was a man of simple pleasures, finding solace in the warmth of the kitchen and the joy of cooking for his beloved family. As we gathered to honor his memory, the house seemed to hold its breath, enveloped in a heavy silence that spoke volumes of the grief that weighed upon our hearts. But amidst the sorrow, there lingered an undercurrent of something more, a palpable sense of the paranormal that sent shivers down our spines. One fateful night, as the mournful vigil dragged on, I ventured into the shadowy corridor to fetch coffee for our exhausted kin. But as I traversed the dimly lit passage, an unnatural chill seized me, a bone-deep cold that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the house. Dread gripped me like icy fingers, urging me to hasten back to the safety of the living room, where my grandfather's casket rested in eerie repose. a silent witness to the spectral terrors lurking in the shadows. As I scurried along the hallway, the air grew thicker, almost suffocating, as if unseen eyes watched my every move from the darkness. Whispers, faint and indistinct, echoed through the ancient walls, sending shivers down my spine. I quickened my pace, my heart hammering in my chest, desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to weigh upon me like a suffocating shroud. Just as I reached the threshold of the kitchen, a sudden gust of icy wind swept through the corridor, extinguishing the flickering candles that lined the walls. In the ensuing darkness, a sense of foreboding enveloped me, as if unseen forces conspired to drag me into the abyss. With trembling hands, I fumbled for the light switch, my pulse racing with each passing second. As the harsh fluorescence flooded the room, I felt a presence, a malevolent energy that lingered in the air like a festering wound. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to mock my very existence. But it was when I turned to leave, my task forgotten in the face of mounting terror, that I saw it. A figure, pale and translucent, hovering over the kitchen table. Its eyes, hollow and lifeless, bore into mine with an intensity that froze me in place. I tried to scream, to flee from the horror that now loomed before me, but my voice caught in my throat, choked off by the overwhelming fear that gripped me. The figure reached out, its ghostly hand extending towards me with a malevolent purpose, and I knew then that I stood on the precipice of something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. In that moment of paralyzing terror, I knew only one thing: I had to escape. With a primal instinct born of desperation, I turned and fled from the kitchen, the echoes of my footsteps reverberating through the empty halls. In a futile attempt to escape the palpable dread that hung thick in the air, I sought refuge in the living room, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows across the walls. But even there, amidst the whispered prayers and nervous glances of my relatives, I could not shake the feeling of impending doom that gripped me like a vice. As the night dragged on, each passing hour seemed to stretch into eternity, the darkness outside pressing in on us with relentless force. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, sent shivers down my spine, a constant reminder of the malevolent forces that lurked just beyond our fragile sanctuary. And then, as the clock struck midnight, a sudden chill swept through the room, extinguishing the candles in a gust of icy wind. In the pitch-black darkness, a chorus of terrified gasps filled the air, mingling with the sound of my own racing heartbeat. With trembling hands, I fumbled for a match, desperate to relight the candles and banish the shadows that threatened to consume us. The flame flickered to life, casting a feeble glow across the room. But it was during the final night of the wake that the true extent of the paranormal activity revealed itself. As I stood before my grandfather's casket, overwhelmed by grief and longing, I whispered my final goodbyes, promising to carry on his legacy of love and care for our family. To my astonishment, tears welled in his eyes, a silent testament to the depth of his love for us, even in death. Though shaken, I brushed off the encounter as a trick of the light, determined to stay strong for the sake of my family. Yet as I prepared lunch the following day, the presence of my grandfather loomed larger than ever. With trembling hands, I ventured into the kitchen, mustering the courage to carry on his tradition of cooking for our family. But as I reached for the pan, a ghostly hand intercepted mine, a pale, aged appendage that seemed to materialize from thin air. My heart raced as I turned, expecting to confront the source of the chilling touch. There, standing in the corner of the room, bathed in the sickly glow of the candlelight, was the unmistakable figure of my grandfather. His eyes, once warm and full of life, now burned with an otherworldly intensity, their gaze piercing through the darkness with a chilling certainty. Unable to tear my eyes away, I watched in terror as he slowly began to approach, his ghostly form shimmering in the dim light. With each step, the air grew colder, the oppressive weight of his presence bearing down on us like a suffocating blanket. As he drew nearer, I could see the anguish etched into his spectral features, a silent lament for the life he had left behind. And there he stood, my grandfather, his form ethereal and translucent, yet unmistakably real. With eyes that bore into mine with a depth of sadness and longing, he reached out, offering me the bread that had always been his pride and joy. In that moment, fear gave way to overwhelming emotion as I realized that his presence was not a source of terror, but a beacon of love and comfort in our time of need. With tears streaming down my cheeks, I embraced the spectral form of my grandfather, grateful for one last moment of connection before he vanished into the ether. As I opened my eyes, the bread remained in my hands, a tangible reminder of the love that transcends even the boundaries of life and death. And though his physical form may have departed, his spirit lives on in the cherished memories we hold dear, forever guiding and comforting us in times of darkness.